My wife was greedy for money and power. It's a pity that I realized it too late, because I could have prevented the horror that happened to me. My wife's cruel betrayal put an end to my faith in people. Wham! I wasn't prepared for it, and the slap sent me stumbling backward, my ears ringing. "What the hell was that for?" I yelled. "Wait, I should back up a few weeks and explain, or none of this will make sense." I'd just come into the house from the garage and walked into our kitchen, a little after 4 in the afternoon, the usual time I get off work. My company has several clients in the UK, so I start my day at 7 a.m. to get a bit of overlap with their workday. It took some time to adjust, but now I like the routine. As I entered the kitchen, I instinctively glanced at our message board. The only thing written there was, "Working late." Great. Looks like I'll be eating alone again tonight. Back when Anne and I were first married and living in that tiny apartment, we hung a chalkboard in the kitchen to keep track of our schedules. When we bought the house, we kept the tradition. In the beginning, we'd leave each other silly, sometimes embarrassing, love notes. I remember once writing, "Can't wait to get home, Cookie. I'm already missing you." When I got back, she'd written, "I miss you more, and stop calling me Cookie." We met at a small bakery, and I'd started calling her Cookie then. Now that she was more established, she didn't like people knowing that nickname, but it was hard for me to stop. Yeah, I know, all those notes and nicknames sound a bit cheesy, but they meant a lot to me, especially now, when the sweetness in our relationship seemed to be fading. These days, if I'm lucky, I get a short note about her plans and when she'll be home. Like today, just working late. I'm not oblivious. I know that even the brightest spark can dim over time, and routine can dull the shine of new love. But over the past year, it felt like our relationship was changing more than just from familiarity. It wasn't just that the love notes had stopped. We barely spent any time together anymore. My work schedule, of course, contributed to the problem. During the week, I would leave for the office long before she even got out of bed. But her job made things worse. You see, Anne is a realtor, and while her office has standard hours, she's essentially at the beck and call of any seller or buyer. Want to make an offer on a house at 9 p.m.? Anne will head over to your place to help you with the paperwork. Trying to sell your home? Anne will schedule an open house, keeping her occupied all afternoon on Saturday or Sunday. You get the idea, but that's just part of it. 2 years ago, Anne decided to run for the city council seat in our district. I tried to convince her not to, but friends and colleagues kept encouraging her. I wasn't too concerned at first, since our longtime councilman had secured 2/3 of the vote in the last election. But halfway through the campaign, his wife suffered a stroke, and he dropped out to care for her. Before I knew it, my wife was taking his seat on the city council. That, of course, brought a whole new set of responsibilities for her. It wasn't just the monthly council meetings. Soon, Anne was meeting with constituents, serving on task forces, and doing whatever else elected officials do. When I stood by her side at the hotel on election night, when she won re-election, I was proud of her and her success. I was happy to see how much joy her new duties brought her. But as the weeks passed, the time we spent together kept dwindling. When I tried to bring up the issue, she became defensive, accusing me of being jealous and unsupportive. As if that weren't enough, over the past year I've noticed a change in her attitude. It's not just that she seems more distant. Lately, when we've been together, there's been a sense of condescension, almost bordering on contempt. Nothing blatant, mind you. Just a feeling I've picked up on. With all the time I've spent alone, I've done a lot of thinking about the situation. Unsurprisingly, it's put me in a bad place. I've been frustrated by the time we've lost together, and resentful of the demands on her that have pulled us apart. I still remember one evening when we were getting close. We had just gone to the bedroom when the phone rang. You guessed it. It was one of her real estate clients with an emergency she had to handle. That still bothers me even now. But to be fair, I also remember when I had to cancel a weekend getaway because one of my company's biggest clients had a network outage. Now, sitting at the kitchen table, I was trying to make sense of everything. Maybe I'm not being fair to Anne. Maybe I'm just jealous that so many other people need her attention. But as a network engineer, I've developed a skill for spotting problems from small signs, and my gut was telling me that there was more going on here than just the things I had thought of. It wasn't just our busy schedules that were making me uncomfortable. I realized it was her attitude towards me. When she first became a councilwoman, she was excited to tell me everything about what was happening with the council and the mayor's office. But now she never talks about it. Had the novelty worn off, or had she decided I wasn't worth sharing things with anymore? That thought really hurt. Suddenly a dark thought struck me. What if she was having an affair? I immediately dismissed such a terrible idea. My cookie would never cheat on me. Yet I couldn't shake the thought from my mind because it seemed to explain so many things that had been bothering me. What was she really doing all those nights when she worked late? Sure, she could be meeting with clients. But what if she was also meeting a lover? Why had she stopped telling me where she was going? Was it out of carelessness? Or was she deliberately hiding something from me? And why was she so dismissive whenever we were together? Had she grown to despise me now that I'd unknowingly become her fool? The more I thought about it, the deeper I spiraled into angry suspicion. I had to do something to stop myself before I did something reckless and irreversible. So I stood up, put on some old work clothes, grabbed the lawnmower, and attacked the yard until it became too dark to continue. The physical activity helped, if only slightly. I still couldn't stop thinking about the situation, but at least I calmed down enough to come up with a plan. When a network starts acting up, the first thing I do is run a series of tests to find the issue. I need to do the same with my marriage, run the diagnostics, and figure out what's gone wrong. Over a dinner of leftovers, I considered which diagnostic tools I could use. I was familiar with many of the electronic gadgets that made spying easy, but the more I thought about it, the more complicated the issue seemed. Sure, I could set up microphones and cameras around the house, but with how little time Anne spent at home, it didn't seem likely to reveal anything useful. It was the time she spent away that concerned me. I thought about tracking her car, but what would that accomplish? Between real estate showings and city council meetings, she was constantly on the move. Parked at a hotel? She often attended luncheons and meetings in hotel conference rooms. Mini recording devices? Tapping all the phones she used? None of it seemed promising. I knew the solution, though I'd been reluctant to consider it, knowing it would be expensive. Hiring a professional was clearly the way to go, so I sat down at my computer and searched for detective agencies. That didn't help much. There were dozens of them. Some had ratings, but I'd become skeptical of online reviews. Too easy to fake those. Was there a section on Craigslist for detective agencies? Angie's List? No luck. Then, further down in the search results, I saw a link to a Channel 9 news story. When I clicked on it, I found they had done a feature on local detective agencies about a year ago. Channel 9, huh? I remembered Amy Howard, the news director. I'd gone to school with her, and we'd even dated back in college. It wasn't serious, and we'd parted as friends. I decided to give her a call. "Hey, Amy, long time no see. Any chance you can grab a beer after work today?" She sounded pleasantly surprised. "I think I can swing that, Dave. It's a slow news day, so unless something big happens, I'll be there." When she walked into the lounge, I remembered why I had been interested in her. She was still just as attractive as when we'd dated, but now she had the polished confidence of a successful professional. It suited her well. We talked for a while, catching up on mutual friends and what we'd been up to since college. Eventually, though, I shifted the conversation. "Didn't your team do a feature on local detective agencies a while back?" She gave me a knowing look. "Oh, Dave, I'm so sorry. I was wondering why you hadn't brought up Anne. Are you looking for a suggestion?" Busted. I hung my head and nodded. She took a moment before responding. "Considering your wife's standing in town, I'd avoid the larger agencies. More employees mean a higher chance of gossip getting out. Does that make sense?" "Definitely. And you probably don't want a one-person operation either, since they can struggle with handling more than a couple of cases at once." I nodded. That also made sense. If you're looking for something in between, the Masterson Agency received positive feedback. They aren't the cheapest, but clients said they were thorough, professional, and got results in a reasonable amount of time. She hesitated. "Dave, the PI business can be a little shady, but you could do far worse than Masterson." That sounded good to me, so I thanked her. As I got up to leave, she reached over and squeezed my hand. "It was nice seeing you, Dave. I hope everything works out. Keep me updated." I promised I would. As I drove home, I thought about the conversation. So much for keeping my marital issues private. I just hope Amy can keep it discreet. Her suggestion still felt right the next day, so I called the Masterson Agency to schedule a meeting. Fortunately, the woman on the phone said Mr. Masterson himself could see me first thing in the morning. "I'll be there," I confirmed. That evening, for a change, Anne came home on time, and we had dinner together for the first time in days. I was nervous about having to make conversation, given what I was planning, but I needn't have worried. She spent the whole evening ranting about some businessman who might challenge her in the next election. I didn't have to say or pretend much at all. The next morning, I woke up early and skipped breakfast to make sure I wouldn't be late for my appointment. After leaving a note for Anne on our message board, I hopped in my car and headed downtown. To my surprise, traffic was light, and I arrived earlier than expected. I double-checked the address for the Masterson Agency and realized it was near my favorite coffee shop, Stranger Brew. When it first opened a decade ago, there was a lot of buzz about the name. Some thought it referred to the unique blend of their house brew, while others joked that the owner was an ex-hippie with a quirky sense of humor. But Anne had checked the records at City Hall and found out the owner's name was actually Joe Stranger. Either way, I always preferred Stranger Brew over the big coffee chains. It seemed I wasn't the only one who liked the place. Even early in the morning, I was lucky to find a seat when I got there. More people kept coming in as I sipped my coffee and ate a breakfast sandwich. Suddenly, a commotion erupted at a nearby table. I looked up to see a large, red-faced man shouting at a young Latina woman sitting alone. "Aren't you done yet? What gives you the right to hog a table when other people want a seat?" The young woman sat there, clearly shocked by the man's outburst. This only seemed to make him angrier. "You're a damn Mexican, aren't you? Probably an illegal. First you come here and take our jobs. Now you're taking a table in my coffee shop. Why don't you swim back across the Rio Grande where you belong?" He swiped his hand across the table, spilling her coffee onto the floor. Before I even realized it, I was on my feet, stepping between the man and the woman's table. "Why don't you leave her alone? She was here before you, and she has just as much right to this table as anyone else. You owe her an apology and another cup of coffee." The man's face flushed even more, and I braced myself, expecting him to snap at me. But then his eyes shifted to something behind me. When I turned around, I saw the owner standing there. He wasn't a large guy, but he was holding a sawed-off pool cue. "You?" he growled at my aggressor. "Get out of my shop and don't come back. You have no right to intimidate one of my customers, and I sure as hell don't need your business." I thought the man might still start a fight, but after glancing at Joe's pool cue and then at me, he decided it wasn't worth it. "Fine," he yelled as he stormed out of the coffee shop. "I'm happy to leave. This place sucks anyway." As the commotion died down, I turned to the shaken woman. "I'm really sorry about that, miss. Can I get you a fresh cup?" She looked up at me shyly. "You don't even know me. Why did you step in?" I shrugged. "I don't know. I just can't stand bullies or bigots." She smiled and extended her hand. "Well, I'm Maria Elena Alvarez, and I'm very grateful for what you did. Many people don't feel the way you do, and even fewer would step up to help a stranger." "You're very welcome, Maria Elena. I'm David Davis, and I'm just glad I could help." At that moment, Joe returned with 2 fresh cups of coffee. "I brought a new cup for both of you. I'm really sorry for what happened, and I hope you'll feel comfortable coming back here." We assured him that we would, and Maria turned to me. "Would you like to join me for coffee? It might free up your table for someone else. If you don't mind the company, I'd be happy to." I sat down with her, and we started chatting as we sipped from our steaming cups. She sighed and said, "I only came in here by chance. I'm starting a new job nearby, and I arrived early because I didn't want to be late on my first day." She took another sip and looked at me. "Do you come here often?" "Not as much as I'd like. Actually, I've got a meeting about some personal business later, and I didn't want to be late either." She nodded, then glanced at her watch. "I probably need to get going now." She stood up and extended her hand again. "Thanks again, David, for stepping in. It was a pleasure to meet you, and I won't forget what you did." I shook her hand and watched her walk out the door. After one last sip of coffee, I figured it was time for me to head out too. After leaving the coffee shop, I headed down the sidewalk toward the address for the Masterson Agency. Glancing up, I spotted Maria walking in the same direction. She paused at a traffic light, and I caught up to her at the intersection. She noticed me, gave a smile and a nod. But as we crossed the street and continued walking, she glanced back, saw me behind her, and frowned. Great, I thought. I really hope she doesn't think I'm following her. To my dismay, she entered the same building I was headed to. I deliberately slowed down, hoping she'd be gone by the time I got inside. But when I finally walked in, there she was, standing in the lobby, arms crossed, looking concerned. "Look," she began as I approached, "I appreciate what you did back at the coffee shop, but that doesn't give you the right—" No, I interrupted. "I swear, I'm not following you. At least not on purpose. I have an appointment in this building." She gave me a skeptical look, then headed toward the elevators. I followed, and when the door opened, I stepped inside too. She pressed the button for the 4th floor and glanced at me, waiting. "I'm going to the 4th floor too," I explained, feeling awkward. Her frown deepened, but she said nothing. I held back when she got off at the 4th floor, but she walked down the hall toward the Masterson Agency. As I slowly followed, she turned, scowling again. Just as we neared the agency's door, understanding dawned on her face, and her frown vanished. She stopped at a door marked Employee Entrance and turned to me. "Good luck with your—" Business, David? Finally, it clicked. I nodded awkwardly. Thanks. And good luck with your new job, Maria. As I walked through the agency's main entrance, the only thought in my mind was, damn, she probably knows exactly why I'm here today. Now I had 2 people aware that I needed a detective. After giving my name to the receptionist, I didn't have to wait long before I was led to Bradley Masterson's office. Well, I wasn't sure how good this agency was, but at least I was meeting the top guy, so that had to count for something. If ever there was someone who fit the name Masterson, it was him. He certainly looked the part. I'm a bit taller than average, but when he stood up, I had to look up at him. Not only was he tall, but he was built like a linebacker, which left me feeling a bit intimidated. But as soon as we shook hands and I started explaining why I was there, his professionalism quickly put me at ease. He skillfully guided me through a series of questions about my wife, my suspicions, her routines, and other details I hadn't even considered. This guy clearly knew his stuff. After about half an hour of conversation, he leaned back in his chair. The fact that your wife is a councilwoman actually makes this easier. She's accustomed to being in public and having strangers around her, so surveillance shouldn't be an issue. A warning bell went off in my head. Your team needs to be careful. If word got out that I was having her followed, it could turn into a political scandal. He gave me a smile that reminded me of a slick car salesman. Mr. Davis, we take pride in our discretion and professionalism. Your wife and anyone around her won't have the slightest idea she's being watched. I still wasn't entirely convinced. So what kind of methods are you using? Audio, video, GPS tracking? He leaned forward, clasping his hands together, and gave me a piercing look. I'm not going to answer that because I don't want you looking for watchers or devices. I've had clients ruin weeks of work by tipping off their spouse accidentally. He scowled a little. Also, I don't want you trying to do any surveillance on your own. You need to stick to your usual routine for the next 2 weeks and act completely normal around your wife. We're professionals. We don't need any help, and we definitely don't need amateurs getting in the way. Do I make myself clear? I leaned back in my chair. Absolutely. Then something else he said hit me. You mentioned 2 weeks. Do you really think you can gather everything you need in just 2 weeks? He relaxed, giving me another one of those confident smiles. You told me you've really noticed a change in your wife's behavior over the past 6 months. That suggests to me that if she is having an affair, it's at its most intense right now. She'll want to see him, or her, I hadn't even considered that, as often as possible. At the same time, she's probably feeling pretty sure she's getting away with it. I expect we'll have a definite answer by next Friday. At the very least, we'll be able to provide you with some behavior patterns that might need further investigation. I couldn't help but be impressed. The man not only seemed well equipped for the job, but he also had a sharp understanding of human nature. I felt like I'd chosen the right person for the task. All right, I'm sold. So how much is all of this going to cost? Without hesitation, he gave me a figure that made me cringe. I know it sounds like a lot, he continued smoothly. But remember, we'll be using several people, vehicles, and high-end electronic equipment. More importantly, we'll give you the answers you need. You've already told me how much the uncertainty is weighing on you. What's your peace of mind worth? He had a point. I reached for my checkbook. The next 2 weeks were extremely uncomfortable. I don't usually pay much attention to my own behavior, so I wasn't sure what my normal was. Did I look suspicious? Was I acting too interested in my wife? Was I asking too many questions or not enough? but it quickly became clear that my behavior didn't matter. Anne treated me with the same indifference she'd shown for months. When I tried to ask her about her work, she responded as if answering was a favor to me. It was also obvious she thought I couldn't possibly understand her work on the council. I felt more like a burden than a husband. The following weekend, trying to show some interest, I suggested we go out for the evening. I shouldn't have bothered. She immediately declined, saying, "I've got open houses on Saturday and Sunday, and you know how exhausting those are." Damn! We might have been living under the same roof, but we were more like roommates than a married couple. What hurt me the most was remembering how our life together used to be. We had so much in common, shared so many interests, and enjoyed our favorite activities together. I recall sitting for hours just talking about our dreams and how we could achieve them. The most painful memories were of the passion we had for one another. We'd pass each other in the hallway, and in the next moment, we'd be in bed, lost in each other's arms, consumed by our desire. Where had all that love and passion gone? Ironically, the closer we got to achieving our dreams, the further apart we grew. I knew I'd gotten caught up in my career, not just because of the financial rewards, but because I found it intellectually stimulating. I had to wonder again, did I somehow drive Anne away? But if I did, I felt Anne was just as responsible. She had succeeded as a realtor, but she always wanted more. Being elected to the council had been a dream come true for her, but lately, she'd been hinting at running for mayor. I couldn't understand why she never seemed content with what she had. The more I thought about it, the more I believed that our career ambitions had played a role in the state of our marriage. Yet, even with all those pressures, a voice in my head kept telling me that there was something else at play, something I wasn't seeing. Was I being paranoid, or was there a real threat I wasn't aware of? Despite how much I hated spying on Anne, I convinced myself I was doing the right thing. Masterson was right. Peace of mind is invaluable. For the 2 weeks, I felt like a patient awaiting exploratory surgery. I was terrified of what I might discover, but I couldn't wait to get it over with. Before my appointment, I stopped at Stranger Brew for my favorite coffee, like a prisoner's last meal. As I sat there, I looked around, curious to see if Maria Elena might be there, but she wasn't. Thankfully, the bigot I'd confronted before was absent too. Finally, the moment had arrived. I made my way to the Masterson agency, walking the 3 blocks like a condemned man on death row. As I was giving my name to the receptionist, Masterson caught me off guard by appearing and personally escorting me to his office. Uh-oh. This can't be good. He sat down, placing his hands solemnly over a folder on his desk, his expression unreadable. I couldn't bear the suspense any longer. "So, what's the verdict? What did you find?" Instead of answering, he slid the folder across the desk towards me. "I think it's best if you see for yourself," he said gravely, and my heart started pounding. Damn, damn, damn. Reluctantly, I opened the folder and picked up the first photograph. There was my wife standing outside a house I didn't recognize, holding the door open for a young couple. In the corner of the photo, I could just make out a "for sale" sign. I quickly grabbed the next picture. It was clearly taken from the visitors' gallery, showing Anne seated in the council chamber. The next photo showed her talking to Mayor Dalloway in what looked like a hallway in City Hall. After that, there was a picture of Anne walking into her real estate office. Confused, I flipped through the remaining photos. Every single one seemed completely ordinary, exactly the kind of things I expected my wife to be doing. When I looked back at Masterson, puzzled, his serious expression had turned into a wide grin. "Mr. Davis, I am pleased to inform you that your wife is not cheating on you. Not only did she not sneak off to meet a lover, but we observed absolutely no behavior that could be considered suspicious in any way. He leaned back in his chair, hands clasped behind his head in a relaxed pose. Your wife, Mr. Davis, is many things. She's a dedicated public servant, a busy and successful real estate agent, and a woman driven to succeed. But I can assure you without a doubt she is not an unfaithful wife. His face turned more serious. I know you've had questions about her, and I imagine the last 2 weeks have been especially difficult for you. But now you can set aside all those doubts and worries and focus on enjoying your marriage. He smiled warmly. Usually my job involves delivering devastating news to husbands or wives about their spouses. So I really appreciate moments like this when I get to share good news instead. He stood up to shake my hand. You're a lucky man, Mr. Davis. I was overjoyed. The doctor had just told me that the spot on the X-ray was nothing. Relief washed over me like a cool breeze on a hot day. I shook his hand again, struggling to find the right words to show my gratitude. The man smiled, reached into his desk drawer, and pulled out an envelope. Here's the rest of the bill for our work. I hope you'll feel it was worth the cost. If you could pay the receptionist on your way out, that would save us from having to send a bill to your home. I'm sure you'd rather avoid that, he chuckled. I won't use all those cliches about walking on air. But let's just say I left Masterson's office in the best mood I'd had in a long, long time. Initially, I basked in the relief, but soon another thought hit me. I need to start working on repairing my marriage. I need to show Anne how much she means to me. I've taken her for granted for too long. By the time I got back to my office, I had a list of things I wanted to do. Thankfully, Anne's weekend was free, so I could go all out. I began writing notes. Friday night, flowers, takeout from that little Mediterranean spot Anne loves, a bubble bath, new sheets on the bed. I'm going to make the night all about her. Saturday, breakfast in bed, spa day, more flowers, dinner reservations at the best restaurant in town, a full-body oil massage, followed by the kind of intimacy we shared when we were first married. I smiled to myself. This is going to be great. As I expected, Anne didn't make it home until 7 o'clock after her zoning committee meeting. She stumbled into the living room and collapsed onto the couch. I'm so tired, she groaned. I don't think I can cook tonight. Suddenly her head perked up. What's that amazing smell? She glanced around and noticed the flower arrangement on the coffee table. And where did these flowers come from? I walked over, knelt beside her, and smiled. The beautiful flowers are for my beautiful wife, and that smell is dinner, already made and waiting for you. She looked at me in surprise, then picked up the vase. These are gorgeous, she said. Let's bring them into the dining room so I can enjoy them while we eat. I hurried into the kitchen to get her plate ready and brought it out just as she sat down. Then, with a clean towel draped over my arm, I presented her favorite chilled wine. Would you like a glass, m'lady? She nodded gratefully, and once our glasses were full, we started eating. A few minutes in, she set down her fork. This is amazing. You haven't done anything like this in a while. What's the occasion? She paused, then added suspiciously, You didn't do something wrong, did you? I knew that question was coming. Yes, I did, I said confidently. I've been neglecting you. You've been working so hard, managing 2 full-time jobs while I've been caught up in my own work. I haven't taken the time to appreciate you. I'm a lucky man, and I want you to know that I feel that way. She sat quietly for a moment before breaking into a smile. We really have been neglecting each other, haven't we?" Then she gestured to the table. "Is there more?" "Absolutely," I said excitedly. "After dinner, I'm drawing you a bubble bath so you can soak and relax. Then I'll tuck you into bed so you can get a proper night's sleep." I grinned. "You'll need it, because I have even more planned for tomorrow." I hadn't seen her smile like that in ages. Later, after her bath, as she slipped into bed, she looked at me in surprise. "Are these sheets new?" she asked, running her fingers across the pillowcase. "The finest cotton with the highest thread count I could find," I said proudly. "Now lie down and enjoy sweet dreams." She gave me another thankful smile before closing her eyes. When I joined her a few hours later, she didn't even stir. The next morning she was still asleep when I came in with a tray of eggs Benedict, hash browns, and a mimosa. "Don't take too long," I told her with a smile. "You've got a spa appointment at 10 o'clock. She shook her head in amazement. "You're going to spoil me, you know." "I hope so. You deserve it. And after the spa, why don't you swing by the mall and see if there's something nice to wear to Il Fiorentino tonight?" She was glowing as I left the room. That evening dinner was something special. Anne had found a new dress, and when I saw her in it, I knew the night was going to end well. As the waiter brought the Prosecco I'd ordered, I raised my glass to the beautiful woman who has made me the luckiest man in the world. She took a sip, then gave me a playful look. "Are you sure you're not feeling guilty about something, Dave? No secret mistress out there, right?" I felt a small pang, having had my own doubts about her in the past. "Absolutely not, Cookie. First, I take my wedding vows very seriously. Second, no one could ever captivate me the way you do." I took another sip. "And I know you'd never do that to me either." "Never," she replied, raising her glass to toast me back. The dinner was perfect, but we skipped dessert, not wanting to be too full for what was coming next. After finishing a second bottle of wine, we were both giggling as we made our way upstairs, arm in arm. When we reached the bedroom, she turned to me and asked, slurring just a little, "So what's next, my dear husband?" I put a finger to her lips and began slowly removing her new dress, then her lingerie. Once her heels were off, I pulled back the covers, helping her stretch out on the bed. Her body trembled with anticipation. I gave her a fantastic massage, but no less pleasant part of this massage was the continuation in which we engaged in intimacy. We both collapsed. Then I pulled the sheet over us, and we fell asleep immediately. We both slept in so late that we missed breakfast and ended up going out for brunch. I had intentionally not planned anything special for Sunday because I wanted us to have a normal day. After brunch, we came back home and took care of our usual weekend tasks. Anne went to the grocery store to restock the fridge while I mowed the lawn. Later that afternoon, I checked my email on the computer, and Anne went to show a house to a potential buyer who had called about one of her listings. It all felt normal and happy, just like our lives together used to. I was in a great mood driving to work Monday morning. Project Woo the Wife had gone perfectly. I felt closer to Anne than I had in months, and I was pretty sure she felt the same way. I had even left a special note on our message board. "Cookies are yummy. Cookies are sweet. Cookie, you make my life complete." I know it's pretty cheesy, but at that moment I really meant it. Work was going smoothly, and I made sure to leave on time so I could be there to greet Anne. When I heard the garage door open, I stood up eagerly and smiled as she walked toward me. Wham! She slapped me across the face with all her strength, causing me to stumble back, my ears ringing. "What the hell was that for?" I shouted. "You bastard!" she screamed. You've been spying on me. You hired a detective to follow me, to take pictures of everything I did. You don't trust me. Oh, crap, this is really bad." She stood there, fists clenched at her sides, her face flushed with fury. "I can't believe you disrespect me like that. Do you even understand how humiliating it is to realize your husband doesn't trust you?" She paused, catching her breath. "Well, what do you have to say for yourself?" What could I even say? She was absolutely right. I didn't trust her. I had her followed. How could I fix this? I stood there, dumbfounded, struggling to think of something that might salvage the situation. "But I do trust you, Cookie. I know you've been faithful, really." "Sure you do, after having me tailed for 2 weeks. Her face twisted with even more anger. "And don't ever call me Cookie again." I just stared at the floor like an idiot. My silence made her angrier. "So, I was right about this weekend. You were being sweet to me because you were guilty about what you did." "No, Anne, that's not true." I started, but she cut me off. "Well, if you weren't feeling guilty, you damn well should have been." Tears of rage filled her eyes as she glared at me. I've never been treated so horribly in my life, and from my own husband. She spun around and headed for the stairs. "I can't even stand to look at you right now." With that, she stormed up the stairs, and I heard our bedroom door slam shut. I collapsed onto the couch, head in my hands. This is awful. This is the worst. What can I say? What can I do to make it up to her? I got up and started pacing the room, my mind racing in circles. Flowers or candy aren't going to fix this. Right now, I don't think there's any gift, no matter the cost, that could win her back. Cost? Oh God, what if she finds out how much I paid Masterson? She'll lose it for sure. My jaw started aching, so I went into the kitchen and pressed some ice in a plastic bag against it. I deserved this. Honestly, I probably deserve a lot worse. Then an even worse thought struck me. What if she wants a divorce? I really couldn't fault her for that. Why did I let my paranoia get the better of me? I could hear her moving around upstairs, wondering what she was doing. After a while, she came down, grabbed her purse, and shot me a venomous glare. "I don't want to be under the same roof as you," she hissed, heading for the door. I quickly followed. "Are you coming back?" "I haven't decided yet." With that, she got into her car and sped off, tires screeching. I stood there stunned for a minute before deciding to go upstairs to see what she'd been up to. At first, our bedroom looked normal, but when I glanced at the guest room, I realized. She'd pulled all my clothes out of the closet and dumped them carelessly on the guest bed. Everything from my dresser was scattered across the guest room floor. I sighed and started picking things up, moving them into the guest room. Looks like this is where I'll be sleeping for the foreseeable future. At least she didn't kick me out of the house. I wasn't really hungry, but I made myself eat some leftovers while waiting for her to come home. The hours dragged on, and eventually I gave up and went to bed. Sometime later, I woke up to the sound of footsteps coming up the stairs. I sat up just in time to see her walk past. Moments later, the bedroom door slammed and I heard the lock click. I fell back onto the pillow in despair. After a restless night, I got up early and used the guest bathroom to shower and shave. Once I was done, I quietly tried the door to the master bedroom, but unsurprisingly, it was still locked. Downstairs, I made myself some coffee, but I had no appetite, so I skipped breakfast. Before leaving for work, I glanced at our message board. I picked up the chalk and wrote, "I'm so sorry, Anne. Can we talk?" There was so much more I wanted to say, but I left it at that. Thankfully, work didn't present any major challenges because I would have been useless handling them. My mind was consumed with figuring out how to explain what I'd done without making things worse. "Babe, I love you, but I thought you were cheating on me." Probably not the best approach. Maybe, "Now that I've thoroughly checked on you, I trust you again." Yeah, that'd really make her feel better. After agonizing over it most of the day, I finally decided on honesty. "Babe, I was scared we were drifting apart, and I let paranoia cloud my judgment." It was truthful, and if paired with a genuine apology, maybe it could work. I left work early, planning to plead my case when she got home. But my hopes faded as soon as I saw the message board in the kitchen. My note had been erased, replaced with a big "Go to hell" in all caps. Not a good sign. Still, I set about making a nice dinner for the two of us. Maybe we could talk over the meal. 2 hours later, it was clear how foolish that idea was as I sat alone at the table. Accepting defeat, I ate my dinner and put her plate in the fridge. I had just finished watching the late news when she came home. As she headed upstairs, I couldn't help but call out, "I was worried about you, Anne." I didn't know where you were. She turned to me, her eyes cold as steel. "Why didn't you call your private investigator for an update?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Then she walked upstairs, and I heard the bedroom door slam. All I could do was groan. That night set the tone for our relationship. A cold war with no negotiations. She came and went as she pleased, and I had no idea what her schedule was. We didn't go anywhere or do anything together. I was certain she was going to divorce me, and every time a stranger approached, I braced for the papers. But to my surprise, they never came. Over time, I noticed not just a cooling, but a gradual shift in our relationship. Her anger towards me faded into indifference. She began speaking to me again, but only about trivial matters like, "Tomorrow is garbage pickup day," or "Did any mail come for me?" She completely refused to discuss our situation, and the master bedroom door remained shut. Lying in bed at night, my thoughts cycled through a range of emotions, much like those irritating, rotating GIFs you see online. I'd start off feeling resentful and defensive about her treatment. How long is she going to keep this up? It's not like I did anything to hurt her. It's unfair for her to shut me out like this. But just as quickly, I'd shift to remorse. "This is all your fault, David. Imagine how angry you'd be if she'd done the same to you. How long would it take for you to get over it?" Then I'd revert back to resentment. Most of all, I felt a profound sadness. I missed my wife and the physical and emotional intimacy we once shared. My aim had been to bring us closer together, but all I'd managed to do was drive us further apart. I couldn't stop remembering the wonderful weekend we had just before everything fell apart, and I found myself mourning the loss. People around me began to notice my depression, but their questions and concern only made things worse. The last thing I wanted was to talk about what I had done. I had no doubt about the reaction I'd receive, especially from my female friends. They'd be outraged by my actions. Worse still, if it got out that I hired a detective to follow Anne, it could start rumors and be used against her in her campaign. If I jeopardize Anne's political future, that would surely be the end for us. I felt trapped in a no-win situation. I was in real distress but had no one to talk to. Now I understand what purgatory must be like. One Sunday, I went for a hike in the woods, hoping the fresh air would help clear my mind. After an hour on the trail, I reached a small clearing and sat on a log to rest. The tranquility of the scene contrasted sharply with my inner turmoil. I can't continue like this. I love Anne, but our marriage no longer exists. It's unfair to both of us to keep going like this. We both contributed to this situation, but I must take most of the blame. Our marriage is over, and I'm the one who ended it. Strangely, once I reached that realization, I felt a sense of relief. I took a deep breath and looked around at the sky, the trees, and the clearing. It's so beautiful here. I wish Anne could see it with me. Then I realized what I had just thought, and the bitter taste of defeat filled my mouth. After catching up on work the following Monday, I searched for a family law firm and found one that advertised a non-confrontational approach to the dissolution of marriage in a respectful environment. That sounded ideal. If our marriage was beyond repair, I wanted to end it as smoothly as possible. I called and scheduled an appointment for later in the week. Just after hanging up, my phone rang again. "Is this David Davis?" asked a hesitant voice that sounded vaguely familiar. "Yes, it is. Who's calling?" "This is Maria Elena Alvarez. I'm not sure if you remember me, but we met at Stranger Brew and—" "Ah, the damsel in distress. I remember you, Maria Elena. What can I do for you?" "I need to talk to you about something very important." All right. What do you need to discuss?" "No, it's something that needs to be discussed face to face. Is this some kind of scam?" She didn't seem like that type, but still. "I don't really understand. Could you explain?" "Please, David, it's urgent that I see you as soon as possible. I can come to your office if that would help." I was about to decline, but something about her tone and the situation intrigued me. Still, it was better to be cautious. "Let's meet in a public place." "No, my office isn't ideal. How about this? I can be at Stranger Brew in 15 minutes. Does that work for you?" "Yes, that's perfect. I'll see you there. Thank you." What have I gotten myself into now? But she had seemed nice before, and the urgency in her voice got to me. I put away my work and headed to the coffee shop. When I arrived, she was already seated at a table in the back. She stood up to shake my hand and then offered me a cup of my favorite coffee. I took a sip, trying to figure out the best way to start. I decided to ease into it with small talk. "So how's work going at Masterson Investigations?" She grimaced. "Not well. I was fired yesterday." "Fired? What happened?" "I'll explain later. First, how are things with your wife?" I was taken aback. How did she know about Anne and me? Then I mentally kicked myself. Of course she knows. She saw me going into the agency. She was probably part of the team surveilling Anne. At that moment, all my problems came rushing back, and my depression resurfaced. I sank back into my chair and shook my head. Things are not going well at all. Somehow Anne found out that I'd had her followed, and she blew up. To my surprise, my pain and sadness overwhelmed me, and I ended up sharing with this near stranger the story I had kept to myself for so long. She listened to me impassively as I recounted my troubles. When I finally finished, she tilted her head and asked, "When you met with Mr. Masterson, did he show you the surveillance photos?" "Yes, of course. Why?" "What did the photos show?" I was puzzled. They were just pictures of Anne going about her daily life, meeting with home buyers, attending council meetings, working in her office. Everything seemed completely normal, completely innocent. Why? She leaned in with a serious expression. "David, yesterday morning at the agency, I needed to make copies of some documents. When I went to the copier, I found your case folder lying there." She blushed slightly. "I shouldn't have looked, but you were so kind to me, and I was curious. So I peeked inside. I saw the pictures you described, David, but there were others as well. Photos that Masterson must not have given you. I saw several pictures of your wife with another man. They were intimate pictures, showing them in bed together." What? That's impossible, Masterson assured me. That's not all, David. The photos had different dates and times. This wasn't a one-time mistake. Your wife is having an affair with this man. I was stunned. You must have made a mistake. That couldn't have been Anne. Why would Masterson lie to me? I don't know, David, but when he caught me with your file, he flew into a rage and fired me immediately. Why would he react like that if there was nothing to hide? Do you have any copies of the photos? I need to see them myself. No, I'm sorry. I didn't have time to make copies. I scrutinized her closely. Are you sure you're not just making this up to get back at Masterson for firing you? The hurt in her eyes was immediate. Of course I'm angry with Masterson, but I would never use you to get revenge. You were so kind to me. You stood up for me even though you didn't know me. I could never repay your kindness in such a cruel way. Her eyes were filled with tears. Maybe she's a great actress. But I dismissed that thought right away. She wasn't lying to me. Still, I struggled to grasp the full meaning of what she was saying. All right. So who was the other man in the photograph? She shook her head. I don't know. I didn't recognize him. I began to say something else, but she reached across the table and grasped my hand. David, there's much I don't understand, but I think I might have a reason for why Masterson lied to you. Your wife holds a position of influence in this city. I believe Masterson is blackmailing her. That stopped me in my tracks. There are plenty of people in town who would be eager to use a scandal to jeopardize Anne's chances in the next election. Given her ambition, she would do almost anything to avoid such a damaging revelation. Without realizing it, I rubbed my jaw where Anne had slapped me. Has she been deceitful all along? Did she treat me poorly and then laugh about it with her lover? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I stood up, walked outside, and began pacing down the sidewalk. Marie Elena hurried after me and grabbed my arm. David, where are you going? I'm going to see Masterson right now to find out what's really happening. Hold on, David. Think about it. If I'm correct, Masterson will just lie to you, because that's the only way he can maintain his leverage over your wife. Besides, by now he has likely removed those photos from your file and hidden them. You won't get anything from him. Seeing my hesitation, she continued urgently. And the same thing will happen if you confront Anne. Do you really think she would admit to anything? She pulled me down to a bench on the sidewalk. If you challenge them with what I've told you, they'll just dismiss me as a disgruntled employee. It will be my word against theirs. She looked sincerely into my eyes. David, I swear I'm telling the truth. I hope you believe that. I examined her face and trusted my instincts. She's not lying. She's trying to repay someone who helped her. I believe you, Maria Elena. I saw relief and gratitude in her expression, but then her focus sharpened. There's something else, David. I wanted to see you immediately because I discovered something important yesterday. I saw Masterson's calendar. He has a meeting with your wife in half an hour. If you're willing to do a bit of surveillance, we might uncover what he's up to. Yes, absolutely. Do you know where they're meeting? I wrote it down. She handed me a slip of paper with an address in the suburbs. 2232 Magnolia Lane. Why there? I muttered more to myself than to her. That's a residential area. I shrugged it off. I'd figure it out later. Let's go, I said. My car is parked nearby. Soon we were heading toward the address Maria Elena had given me. I kept silent, but inside I was boiling. I'd felt so guilty for not trusting my wife, and now it seemed I had every reason to doubt her. Damn her. Who was her secret lover? How long had the affair been going on, and what was Masterson's involvement? I told myself to calm down, to wait until I had solid proof that Anne was cheating. Jumping to conclusions had caused trouble before, but that was because Masterson had lied to me. It was hard to stay composed. "There it is!" Maria Elena exclaimed as I drove past the address. I drove another block, turned around, and parked 2 doors down. "Damn, this is a really nice neighborhood. Whose house is it?" I asked, mostly to myself. As we got closer to the house, I noticed something I had missed earlier: the for sale sign from my wife's real estate agency. Suddenly, it all made sense. That's why they're meeting here. The house is vacant, I told Maria Elena in a low, urgent voice. The owner's moved out and she's been trying to sell it for months. We hid behind a tall privet hedge that surrounded the property and headed for the driveway. 2 unfamiliar cars were parked there. "Stay here. I'll look around. Maybe I can find them," I whispered. "I'm coming with you," she insisted. And I shrugged. Together we approached the house cautiously, remaining invisible behind the hedge. We heard faint sounds coming from the back of the house. When we got closer, we saw French doors leading apparently to the office. We both looked inside, and my heart started pounding. Anne, dressed in underwear that I hadn't seen before, was sprawled on the couch and talking to someone who couldn't be seen from the viewing angle. Suddenly, a figure appeared in my field of vision, and I tried my best not to make any noise. Bradley Masterson walked into the room, smiling broadly. He grinned, and I heard him say, "Why don't you show me how much you like it, baby?" It was a terrible sight. I grabbed Maria Elena's hand and motioned for her to return to the street. I've never been so furious in my life. I hissed as soon as we were out of earshot. If he's blackmailing her, she doesn't seem to mind too much. "Maybe we should take a picture?" she asked. I paused, then smiled. "Oh, yes. We'll take a lot of pictures, and maybe we'll invite someone else." I hurried to Anne's for sale sign, pulled it out of the ground, and threw it behind a hedge where it wouldn't be easy to spot. Then I took out my phone and dialed 911. "I want to report a break-in. I was walking around the neighborhood and saw 2 people break down the door at 2232 Magnolia Lane. They're inside now, probably robbing the place. If you hurry up, you can catch them before they leave." I hung up the phone without giving my name, ignoring Maria Elena's confused look. Then I called a friend from Channel 9. "Hey, Amy, are you guys still covering this series of apartment thefts?" "Well, I have some useful advice for you. There's a break-in going on at 2232 Magnolia Lane right now. The police are on their way, but if you hurry up, you can get ahead of the competition and get amazing footage. Yes, 2232 Magnolia Lane. No problem. I'm glad to help." "What did you do?" my companion asked, but I waved her question away. "Let's go back and get these photos." When we returned to the French doors, Anne was still in the same place, completely focused on Masterson. To our surprise, another man suddenly appeared from somewhere deep in the house. While Anne was having fun with the Mastersons, the second man came over and started having fun with them too. Maria Elena tugged at my hand insistently. "It's the man in the photos," she whispered. "Do you know who he is?" I nodded, disappointed. "Oh yes, I know him." Anne introduced me to him at one of her political events. "This is Harold Hartfield, the head of our city's zoning commission." Suddenly, Maria pulled me aside and pointed to the driveway where a police car had just pulled up. We rushed to her. "We just saw them inside," I panted to the police. "If you hurry up, you can catch up with them." The older patrolman glanced at his partner. "There are 2 cars in the driveway, and I don't see any signs of forced entry. Then he gave me a suspicious look. "Are you sure there's a crime happening here?" At that moment, the Channel 9 news van screeched to a stop on the street, and a reporter and cameraman rushed over to us. "What's going on? Are we in time to catch some action?" The first officer started to reply when we heard it, a piercing female scream that wavered at the top before dropping into a painful groan. "Oh my God!" I shouted. "He's killing her!" The two officers exchanged panicked looks, and then Anne screamed again, even louder this time. "Let's go!" the first cop shouted, pulling out his gun and sprinting toward the front door. The younger cop followed closely behind, and the two of them burst through the door and disappeared inside. "Start recording!" the reporter yelled to his cameraman. Then he turned toward the camera, speaking rapidly. "Behind me is 2232 Magnolia Lane, where police are responding to a suspected break-in. We've just heard frantic screams coming from inside, and the officers have entered the house to investigate." No sooner had he finished than a chaotic noise erupted from within. It sounded like an all-out brawl, shouting, crashing furniture, and breaking glass. The cameraman zoomed in on the house just in time to catch the commissioner running out the front door completely knack-d. Hot on his heels was my wife, equally undressed. "Wait for me!" she yelled as Harold flung open the door of one of the cars and fired up the engine. Once she was inside, he threw the car into reverse, slamming the brakes just in time to avoid hitting the squad car at the end of the driveway. In a desperate move, Hartfield shifted into drive and sped across the yard. He yanked the wheel, tearing up the lawn, and tried to plow through the hedge. He nearly made it, but the thick branches caught the car, lifting the rear axle just enough for the tires to spin helplessly in the air. The reporter instantly recognized the two politicians. He signaled his cameraman and hurried over to the side of the trapped car. "Commissioner Hartfield, Councilwoman Davis, could you please explain to our viewers what you were doing in the house together? And where are your clothes?" The commissioner refused to respond, and when the reporter pressed further, Harold rolled up the window. As the camera kept rolling, the two occupants inside attempted to cover themselves with their hands and arms while shouting angrily at each other. The cameraman then turned his attention back to the house. There, the hunched, knack-d figure of Bradley Masterson emerged, his arms handcuffed behind him and blood streaming from several wounds. The two policemen escorting him appeared to be in rough shape as well. "Who is that?" the reporter asked, bewildered. "That's Bradley Masterson, the head of Masterson Investigations," Maria Elena said. "He's a private detective." The reporter jotted down the name but was still puzzled. "And who are you?" he asked Maria Elena. "We need to head back home, dear," I said firmly, taking her arm and guiding her toward my car. As we drove away, we saw the police trying to disperse the crowd of neighbors who had gathered to watch. In the days that followed, the news became the town's sensation. Channel 9 used its footage to create a promo for their nightly news, repeatedly showing live-action clips of the commissioner, the councilwoman, and the detective with their private parts digitally covered. The story was so scandalous that Channel 9's national affiliate picked it up, making it a feature on the national evening news. Soon, it seemed that there were few parts of the country where people hadn't seen much of my wife's impressive figure running across the grass. Masterson was promptly jailed for aggravated assault on a police officer. During his transfer to his cell, he made several reckless remarks about the two officers and what he planned to do to them once he was released. The judge presiding over his arraignment was not amused by Masterson's comments and denied him bail. The police faced challenges in determining any crimes committed by the commissioner and the councilwoman. Breaking and entering was quickly ruled out, and once it was discovered that Anne was the listing agent for 2232 Magnolia Lane, even the trespassing charges were dropped. Nevertheless, the intense media coverage forced the two of them into hiding. The morning paper was frustrated at being scooped on the scandal, and the editor assigned the entire city desk to investigate the true story. The next day's headline blared, "The Commissioner and the Councilwoman. Politics makes strange bedfellows." I had thought the whole affair was merely about intimacy, but I was mistaken. An enterprising newspaper reporter uncovered evidence of bribery linked to various local real estate projects. It turned out that the councilwoman had been soliciting bribes from developers, while the commissioner had arranged favorable zoning variances in exchange for the councilwoman's intimacy favors. Apparently, their hiding place wasn't secure enough, because once the story broke, they were quickly arrested and charged with official misconduct. As soon as I returned to my office from Magnolia Lane, I called the law firm I had previously contacted and canceled my appointment. "Oh," the woman I spoke to said hopefully, "does this mean you and your wife have reconciled?" "It means I no longer want an amicable separation," I replied coldly. "I'm going to hire a top-notch lawyer and take her to the cleaners." I suppose it was only a matter of time before I got caught up in the chaos, at least initially. The police interviewed me several times, trying to figure out if I was involved in or had benefited from my wife's little scheme. Thankfully, Anne had kept all her funds in a separate account solely in her name. When I explained to the lieutenant that I had hired Masterson to investigate my wife, he just looked at me with sympathy and shook his head. My friends and colleagues were also sympathetic, but they struggled to find the right words. Saying, "We all admired Anne, and are sorry to learn she turned out to be a corrupt politician and a cheating SLIT," didn't seem quite right. Nor did, "Sorry you were cheated on." In the end, most of them avoided me, and I couldn't blame them for it. I did hire a top-notch attorney to handle my divorce, though it turned out to be excessive. With Anne's public infidelity and the likelihood of prison time, there was no question about the divorce being granted. However, my attorney made sure Anne received the worst part of the financial settlement. I thought I was done with Anne, but to my surprise, I had one final encounter with my soon-to-be ex-wife. I received a call from Anne's lawyer who wanted me to be a character witness for Anne. I laughed out loud at the thought, but my amusement faded when the attorney mentioned that she intended to subpoena me if I refused. The prospect of being dragged back into Anne's mess was hardly appealing, and I considered refusing. However, when her attorney said that Anne wanted to interview me before the trial, and that Anne would be present, I decided on the spot to agree, provided Anne answered some questions for me. I was relieved when she agreed. Maybe now I could finally get some answers. When I entered the conference room at the attorney's office, Anne was already there. She wore one of her power suits, the kind she liked for council meetings when she knew the TV cameras would be there. I had to admit, she still looked good. But when I looked closely at her face, it was clear that stress had taken its toll. "Mr. Davis," Anne's attorney began, "I understand your marriage is ending under difficult circumstances. That's not why we're here today. What we're trying to establish is that before Mrs. Davis was influenced by others, she was a loving wife and a loyal companion of good character. We'd like you to testify to that and share about your lives before recent unfortunate events." Influenced by others, I thought wryly. Well, that's one way to say it. But I kept calm and looked at the attorney. "When I married my wife," I began, "I thought she was the most attractive, exciting woman I had ever met. She was smart, funny, and had a way of making people comfortable around her." The attorney gave a quick nod to Anne, then smiled at me, clearly noting every word. For the first 6 years of our marriage, Anne and I shared the same dreams and goals. I thought we were on track to achieve them, The attorney interrupted. You mean 8 years, don't you, Mr. Davis? I believe you've been married for 8 years. I ignored her and continued. But after Anne was elected to the city council, she changed. She became ambitious and manipulative, only focused on herself and her own goals. She started neglecting me and our marriage more and more to advance her career. It was her growing indifference and the contempt she showed me that led me to hire a private investigator. No, Mr. Davis, that's not what we need. You should— Stop it, Virginia. Anne cut her off. I told you this was a long shot. He was never going to help me. Then she glared at me bitterly. So why are you here today, Dave? What do you want? I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table. I want 30 minutes alone with you to ask you some questions. Will you help me if I do this? Not a chance in hell. She stared at me for a few moments, then let out a sigh and slumped back in her chair. Fine, I guess I owe you that much. You can have 30 minutes. Are you sure? Anne's attorney asked. It's fine. He won't harm me. The attorney shook her head and left the room, closing the door behind her. Anne turned back to me. All right, Dave, what do you want to ask? I had so many questions, but I decided to start with the simplest. Why, Anne? Why did you do it? Suddenly she sat up straight, her eyes blazing with anger. It's all your fault, you know. I wouldn't be in this mess if you hadn't hired that detective to follow me. I was taken aback. My fault? How could this possibly be my fault? You were the one who— But she was too furious to listen. Everything was going perfectly until that bastard walked into my office with those pictures of Harold and me. And you were the one who set him on me. I was so furious with you when I found out. I wouldn't have needed to do that if you hadn't been having an affair with Hartfield, she sneered. That wasn't an affair, that was politics. Harold was a terrible lover, and smaller than you. I only seduced him because he could get me the zoning variances I needed. I was shocked. Why did you need zoning variances? You're not a developer. She shook her head as if I were the slowest student in her class. I didn't need the variances, but the big developers did, and I needed their support to run for mayor. Like I said, it was all political. So it was just a matter of political support, right? Then why did the cops find over $1 million in your hidden bank account? She smiled a little sheepishly. Well, maybe it was about the money too. Then her face turned angry again. But none of this would be a problem if you didn't start poking your nose into other people's business. I wasn't going to let her drag me into this argument. And what about Masterson? What was he trying to achieve? Half of what I got and half of what Harold got. Wait. You said Harold was only involved in this because you pushed him to do it. Her face twisted strangely. As I said, Masterson wanted to get half of what Harold was doing. And when he got it the first time, I realized he was a huge improvement. I suddenly remembered and I felt sick. So I guess he didn't have to force himself on you. She grinned slyly. Only for the first time. After that, I was more than happy to participate. She noticed the expression on my face and laughed. Everyone has their own preferences. I was just lucky enough to find mine. You don't seem too upset that I hired Masterson, I said sarcastically. She gave me a lazy smile. No, I guess I owe you for that. Then the smile disappeared. And everything would be fine if it weren't for those nosy neighbors from Magnolia Lane. If they hadn't called the police, I wouldn't have gotten into this mess. For the first time that day, I felt a bit of relief. I stood up and smiled at my wife with affection. Actually, it wasn't the neighbors. I'm the one who called the cops, and I also called Channel 9. You did all that, you bastard! She shot up so quickly that her chair toppled over. She grabbed a law book from the shelf behind her and flung it across the table at me. She looked ready to climb over the table to get at me when her attorney rushed in and grabbed her arm. "Calm down, Anne, calm down. You can't do this." "Too bad I couldn't be a witness for your client, counselor," I said, as I made my way toward the door. Then I turned back. "Enjoy your time in prison, Cookie." In the end, Masterson pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of assaulting a police officer in exchange for testifying about the bribery scandal. Besides the jail time, of course, he lost his private investigator's license. Hartfield got off with a lighter sentence since he hadn't actually taken any money. But he lost his job, his wife, and his dignity, and was never seen again around town. I figured Pencilneck got what he had coming. I deliberately stayed away from news about Anne's trial, partly because I didn't care, and partly because I wanted to be able to claim ignorance if anyone asked. But one day, while I was in Stranger Brew, I happened to see a newspaper with her sentencing story. I couldn't resist reading it. Anne ended up with 3 to 5 years in state prison, plus a $25,000 fine for soliciting illegal compensation. I was also happy to see she was facing federal charges for income tax evasion on her secret slush fund. Apparently, the fact that the state had confiscated her ill-gotten gains didn't matter to the feds. I rubbed my cheekbone. Good. She got what she deserved. Maybe now I could move on with my life. Just then, my thoughts were interrupted by a voice I hadn't heard in a long time. "Hey, stranger, buy a girl a cup of brew?" I smiled up at her. "It would be my pleasure, Maria Elena."